Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, welcome everybody. Our talk is called Small Changes Can Lead to Big Accessibility Improvements. So this is where we introduce ourselves. Nice to meet you. We're Amy and Bruno. Amy, you want to tell us a little bit about the picture of you here?
Sure. In our pictures, we have pictures of ourselves with our cats. And so in my picture, it is my face peeking in from the side while my cats take up the majority of the frame. It's my gray cat, Abby. She was a tabby cat. I lost her in November, but she is still part of the family, so she's still with us today at Access U. And my black and white cat, Olivia, who is a tuxedo.
And then you see me here. My name's Bruno. This is me with my two stepchildren. This is Crunchwrap Supreme, the orange and white cat, and Remy, the gray cat. They both sit with me oftentimes while I'm at work because they have a little laying down spot at the window right next to me. Because I'm a cat person, I'm also, again, this year wearing cat socks. So I'm going to lob it over to Amy. So Amy, tell them a little bit about your experience and why they might want to listen to you.
Sure. I have been in the accessibility field professionally for about 14 years, I want to say. And that time has included working with designers, working with end users, working with standards bodies, conversations with all sorts of people all along the accessibility journey. I spent 4 of those years doing direct teaching to users with disabilities, primarily those who are blind and low vision. I myself am a screen reader user of 30 years and have lived experience of being both neurodivergent and blind/low vision.
All right. And some caveats.
Well, the caveats for me are that most of my experience is with people who are blind and low vision. Most of my experience is with adults and teens. And almost everyone I've worked with has English as their first language, and most of them grew up and lived here most, if not all, of their lives. Now we'll turn it over to you, Bruno, to talk about why we should listen to Bruno, because there's plenty of good reasons.
Thank you. So I have 17 years of experience in the software industry, doing software design and development, doing usability testing, planning and facilitation, doing QA and accessibility evaluations, teaching accessibility, and also growing corporate accessibility maturity. So I've done that for the most part at UKG. And I've been focusing exclusively on accessibility for the past 7 years or so. But things to know about me is I'm not a daily screen reader user like Amy, right? So I'm more experienced in creating accessible software than using it, to be honest. And my experience working with people with disabilities is limited mostly to people with visual and cognitive disabilities. So there's definitely gaps in my knowledge, or at least my hands-on experience. I've also been working almost exclusively in a corporate business-to-business environment. So most of my advice is going to come from that angle. And while I do speak a few languages, my professional experience is pretty much limited to English. So moving right along, we want to talk a little bit first about why prioritizing is important. So why are we even talking about making small changes when we know there's so much that needs to change? So Amy, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The first reason I want to look at prioritization is that, frankly, there are so many success criteria from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There's 87 of the things in 2.2. And even if we cut it down to just AA, there's, well, according to someone I talked to at lunch, 56. I hand counted 55. I I trust them, so probably 56, so the PowerPoint says 55. It was hand counted using the checklist for WebAid.
And so for a visual aid, I have here on the screen the WCAG itself. This is 2.2, and I've been scrolling it for a little while at a speed that a human being would not be able to read. And we're probably not even 25% past this page yet. So to drive the point home that there's a lot of stuff in the WCAG. So just do it all is not really a valid strategy to get someone started who hasn't done this before. So if you're working with a team that's just doing their first accessibility evaluation and remediation, fix it all is not going to be on the table because just look at this. There's so much. So out of all of these success criteria, there's all this text, but to understand it, you actually have to click these little understanding links here on the WCAG. And once you do, then there's even more text. And there's one of these for every single one of the criteria. So to say that the WCAG goes deep and there's a lot in it for people to meet is definitely an understatement. So that kind of drives home the point that for sure, there's a lot of success criteria in the WCAG. I think the second point we're going to make is a little bit about how many issues there are. So for that, I wanted to share this. There's something called the WebAIM Million Report. So this most recent one from 2025. This is a report that takes the 1 million most influential, most used web pages out there and tries to do some high-level automated accessibility assessment of them to find common issues that are easy to detect, by machine. You want to tell us a little bit about those issues, Amy? Or sorry, about the WebAIM Million, and then I'll get into the stats a little bit.
Sure. The WebAIM Million, like Bruno mentioned, is the top 1,000 or million websites that are most impactful on the web. And there's an average of 51 errors per page, and that is just using automated testing. So we know that the numbers are almost certainly higher. That said, this is pretty good automated testing for these types of issues that we're going to talk about today.
So some examples of those issues that this survey finds are that 79.1% of the home pages out there, out of these 1 million, had text that was below the contrast level that's required for a 2.2 AA. 48.2% of them had form elements that didn't have proper labels. 39% of them were improperly skipping heading levels. So these are all like pretty user impacting issues, things that would make a user's experience, would definitely detract from being able to complete tasks or do whatever it is that they're trying to do there. And if you don't know what any of these mean, we're going to get into these in a little bit more detail. So there's a lot of issues in the WCAG. There's probably a lot of issues in your app or website. And another thing that we have to consider is your teams that are going to be doing all the work. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Just like there's so many issues out there on the web and so many criteria, there are so many things that are keeping our teams busy these days. We've got changing priorities that are coming down from management. We've got the challenge of bringing new features to market against the challenge of dealing with technical debt. We've got issues of keeping up with the latest and greatest on the web. And of course, most of us are probably feeling at least tangentially crunched a little bit by the AI gold rush. So there's a lot going on. So that's
For sure.
Why we need the prioritization.
Absolutely. So prioritization can come and help with that. It allows us to make a big impact with less effort at the beginning when it's most important, because that's going to improve the morale of your team. It's going to improve your customers' impressions of your sites and apps. And it's going to, most importantly of all, build momentum. Because there's so many issues and because it's going to take so much time to get through it, you're going to want to ease your team into it in a way that gives them confidence and makes them feel like they can achieve it. So starting with those issues that you know for sure are going to be easier to fix in the beginning and that also make your users' experience that much better is going to be a great way to build that momentum. So it's going to help us focus on the things that matter the most, even if maybe they're hard. But what we're going to recommend is starting with these easier things. So first, a little disclaimer though. There's a lot of places where you could start fixing things, but this isn't a definitive list, right? This is just it's not a rigorous or scientifically perfect starting point. It's just our recommendation for things that are high impact, low effort. When you would use these is if you're not sure where to start and you're kind of in analysis paralysis and you're trying to decide what should we do? There's so much. We would say, try these first. And so our methodology was just finding things that have, as far as we know, a very noticeable material impact on the users and their user experience, while also being very easy and low effort to implement. Okay. So, okay, we get it. Where's the list, right? So we have 7 small changes that we're going to go through here that can make a really big impact in your user experience. So number 1 is going to be keyboard focus indicator. And you want to tell us a little bit about what those are?
Sure. Your keyboard focus on a web page is literally where you can interact with the page, usually by hitting enter or space. It's controlled with tab and shift tab, and the visible keyboard focus indicator is literally just that. It just shows you where you are on that web page, so that if you were to hit enter or space, you know what you're going to interact with.
And so this is all of the rules around this are in WCAG 247, focus visible. If you want to look deeper into that, our presentation has a link out there. So tell us a little bit about who specifically would benefit from improved keyboard focus.
First and foremost, anyone who is using the keyboard as their primary or only method of interacting with web page, but also anyone else who even uses the keyboard moderately, say just to fill in forms so that they can just tap between the form elements instead of having to mouse in, out. The form elements having visible, or the keyboard focus being visible, also is going to impact anyone who is using a device that emulates a keyboard. So that might be a snip and puff device, that might be a switch. And screen reader users who are working with a sighted colleague will also benefit, as will their sighted colleague, because everyone will be on the same page as to where they are, well, on the page. So of course, with that, let's ask Bruno, how would you fix these issues?
So we're going to go through this presentation with this sort of rhythm where we're going to talk about how both designers can improve and influence these things, and also engineers. So for designers, I would recommend that the first thing that you need to observe is that you can't ignore the focus state. You have to make sure that for every interactive element that you plop into your design, you actually thought about what the focus state should be. So my recommendation would be that a best practice would be that you design one focus state that works really well across a broad range of use cases, and then you just implement that consistently. So that can create a really nice effect visually for your visual users too, in that when they're tabbing from element to element, rather than each element just saying, hey, look at me, it gives you the impression that the user is really in control and they're moving this little cursor from thing to thing because it's staying the same. It's got the same colors, maybe the same border, the same thickness, etc. So it creates a really nice flow for the user from a visual perspective. The other best practice I would recommend is to not be shy. Make sure that your focus state looks really bold and intentional, because it's going to be something that your users are going to use to make very important decisions, right? The decision between, am I typing my first name or am I typing the name of my city? That's something that should be really clear to them. And you don't want to end up in a situation where people can't, for example, buy something or can't have something shipped to them because you didn't have clear enough focus indicators. So you got to make sure that they're very noticeable. A best practice I would recommend is that if you did any sort of interactive design, you probably at some point of that design identified a really good, really noticeable call to action color, like for your most important buttons or for things that really need to stand out on your website. So just reuse it. That's that's the easiest way to make sure that your focus indicator is really noticeable. You already know what color stands out in your designs, so just use it. If you're worried about maybe it not standing out in the context of your existing buttons, I would recommend adding a little visual gap between the focus indicator and the button, or maybe even using two colors, like a background and a foreground color, to make sure that it stands out around, against a wide variety of backgrounds. I'm going to show you a visual example of all of this in a minute, but first I want to get through the recommendations for engineers. So what engineers can do to improve this is, much like the designers, to not forget this. Something you really want to look out for is there's a lot of CSS libraries and a lot of boilerplate CSS that you can get out there that will speed up your development and make things easier as an engineer. A lot of engineers don't realize that those resets actually take away some really important stuff, like focus states. So if you're using a CSS reset or you're using any sort of CSS framework, there's a good chance that this is something you're going to want to look at and double check, because you don't want to end up in a situation where every single focus indicator is gone, and that can happen. Something else that you can do as an engineer is you can provide air support for your designer to make a really bold, really intentional, really easy to see focus state by implementing this technique. I've seen a lot of designers and product managers complain about the fact that when you touch with a finger or when you click with the mouse on an element, that the visual focus indicator is placed on it, and they're like, oh, it looks too loud, it looks too busy, we don't like that. So it is possible that an engineer can make this better. So the way you would do that is essentially use JavaScript to track what the last thing that was touched or clicked with the mouse, and you would have CSS that would tell your elements, basically, don't show the focus indicator in these cases. But you have to tread really light. Anytime that you're hiding the focus indicator, it's very, very risky. So you got to really know what you're doing on this. But on the plus side, if you do that, it also frees up your designers and your design system to have a very bold, very noticeable focus indicator. Everybody wins in this point, right? You don't have to like try to tone it down because the people that are going to be clicking around would find it annoying. You can just make sure to make it very bold and intentional, and it will only show up when you need it to. So what that might look like is I have a little visual example here. We can look at, in the way. Okay, so we have here an example of focus indicators. This is coming from UKG's design system called Ignite. So if I tap through the page, you can see that we have a very visible, very bold focus indicator around these accordion controls. If I go into any of these accordions, like for example, if I open up this field, input fields, as I cycle through the input fields, it's very obvious to the user which thing is currently highlighted. Similarly, if I go down to this button, you can see our recommendation from earlier, right? We're using the same call to action color for very important buttons as we are for our focus indicators. And the way that we're making those stand out is by having a little bit of a gap between them. So it becomes very visually noticeable what's in focus, and you don't have to come up with a whole host of different colors and variations on it. So again, and as you can see here, we're using the same focus indicator pretty much for all elements. The same thickness, same color, same border radius. So that creates this very nice effect where it's very easy to follow where it's going on the page because it's the same thing. So that's our recommendation. And you might notice here, for example, if I click an element with my mouse, that the focus indicator isn't going to be sitting there lingering. So I can click and toggle these accordions. And because I'm a mouse user and we implemented that technique that I mentioned earlier, you're going to see that we don't have to put them in the user's face when they don't necessarily need them. So that's what we see. But everything is working perfectly fine as expected, because if I hit my tab key from here, I can still navigate to the next element. So the technique would allow this to adapt to the user's modality. Like if you're going between using the mouse and using the keyboard, it's still going to work. So that's something you're going to really want to make sure that it's still working. So that's the care you have to take when you use that technique. Okay, so this is a keyboard focus indicator. So now we're going to move along to our next very high impact improvement, and that is having enough visual contrast. This is the one that designers hear about the most. You want to tell us a little bit about what that is, Amy?
Sure. Visual contrast on the web page is literally the difference between your focus, or not focus, your foreground and your background elements, whether that foreground be text or icons or images, and whether your background is images or flat or pattern. But it's important to consider the contrast of your page because that's going to affect quite a few people.
Yeah, sure.
Text tends to be a bit more important, obviously, but don't forget the non-text items. I believe those are WCAG
143 for text and then 1411 for non-text. So there's two whole success criteria for this. And like we mentioned, the text one is a lot more strict because text is a little more important. But yeah, who does this impact the most?
This impacts any visual user. It's going to impact folks who are out in the sun or on that cheap Android tablet that their cousin got them for Christmas. Or maybe someone who just doesn't quite see like they used to, or someone who's low vision. And it also can at times affect colorblind users depending on the values as well as the contrast and the type of color blindness that they possess.
For sure. So we can share definitely a few tips for that. So as a designer, something you're going to really want to internalize is to make sure that proper contrast is a part of your process throughout, that it's integrated into every step of your design. The moment you drop something on the screen, the moment you tweak a color, you're going to want to have that reflex of immediately checking whether it has contrast or not. You don't want to just wait until the end and do like a contrast pass when you're done with everything else, because that's a recipe for missing contrast issues, or even identifying problems that are going to stack on top of each other. So, you know, this color didn't work, so you have to tweak it, and now you're going to have to tweak another color, and those things are going to snowball into a much bigger effort. So the best practice would be to basically be checking the whole time. So some ways that you can do that is you can have like a desktop level tool that just always is running on your computer or your device, whatever you're using, where you can check the contrast of anything that's on screen. So one that I recommend is called Contrast. You can get it at usecontrast.com. And I can demo a little bit of how it works. So for example, you know, you don't have to have access to the code to test something, you just eyedropper the colors. So looking at this presentation, if I wanted to ensure that the text has enough contrast against the background, I would just go up here to contrast. It has a little icon in my toolbar and I would click it. And from here, oh, please, sorry, Zoom, you need to get out of my way here. Okay, so when you click it, you get this little window that gives you two eyedroppers, one for the foreground, one for the background. So I would take an eyedropper to the background color, click here, then I would take an eyedropper to the foreground color, and I would find, so this is something to pay attention to. When you're trying to get a value for a bit of text, you don't want to click those little pixels along the edge that are different colors. This is basically something your computer does to just smooth it out and make the text look a little smoother and less crunchy than it really would be at the resolution of your monitor. So you want to make sure you go really to the inside of the letter and click in there. So then what that's going to do is this is going to tell you exactly which WCAG criteria it passes. So in this case, this is a AAA level of contrast. So that means we're good. If it was bad contrast, like for example, if my text was the same color as this gray here, and my background was the same color that it is right now, that would be a fail. So this contrast is so low that you can't even really see in the interface that it is a pass. So that's what you're going to be looking for. When you're using this, you're going to make sure that you click into the inside of the element, and it's going to tell you exactly which WCAG criteria it meets. So you're going to be looking for AA and AAA. And if it says anything but that, then you know that your contrast is not good. The other alternative to tools like this that require you to click around and sample the colors is to just use parts of your design software. So Figma, which is very popular now, has a lot of plugins that can do this. And now even natively inside Figma will tell you when you have a color selected, how much contrast it has. So you don't even really need to pull up a separate tool or take extra steps. It's just always right there. So it's reinforcing that important reflex that you need to have. So the best practice here would be at a design level to build this kind of contrast directly into your design system. You should be reusing your elements as much as possible in the name of efficiency and consistency. So if you have that contrast as a part of your design system, you don't need to worry about it except for the occasional spot check. Something looks fishy. As a developer or engineer, I would definitely recommend that you do some automated testing. This is the easiest, and one of the more easily successful use cases for automated testing is it will find contrast issues relatively easily. And if there's some sort of weird coding that's been done where it's ambiguous and it can't tell, it'll tell you that as well. And then if it does, that's when you can use the tool that we just saw earlier to double check yourself. The important part here, though, is that for an engineer, checking the contrast is very, very easy because all of the automated tools like, say, DQX or Microsoft Accessibility Insights or WebAIM Wave, all of those tools are going to very easily be able to tell you if you have a contrast issue after one click. So there's no reason not to do it as an engineer, to just always stay on top of this. So pretty much as an engineer, you should never be shipping or pushing anything that doesn't pass this contrast check. So that's what it looks like. You would just use the, just click the scan for any of these tools, and it'll just tell you right away whether there's contrast issues, and if so, how many. So that's it. So the next brings us to our next improvement. That's also related a little bit to color choices. It's just called not using color alone. So Amy, what does color alone even mean?
Color alone means that you are providing information that is important to the meaning of your web page using only color. You might see this in something like a widget that is green if things are working and red if they are not. You might also see it, and this is probably where we see it most often, in something like a set of edit fields where you've got an error. Please fix the errors in red. Well, I don't know which ones are the errors in red.
So the WCAG criteria that talks about the details around this is 141, use of color. If you want to read more about it, you can check that out. Tell us a little bit about who this impacts the most.
Sure. Unlike our last one, which hits almost all of your visual users, this one hits hardest for folks who are blind, folks who are low vision, folks who have set up their own CSS or are using dark mode often will face this, and folks who are colorblind.
Absolutely. So the way you would avoid this as a designer is to, first and foremost, I would say don't worry about using color. There's no problem with color. Color itself isn't the issue. Feel free to use color. Go ahead and have fun, use color, make things noticeable. If you're using a color for something important that the user needs to know, just make sure to reinforce it. So instead of just saying, marking all the errors in red with a little outline, maybe you could add an icon. So an icon is a really good way to reinforce your color differences. A caveat about icons, though, is that sometimes their meanings aren't obvious. So if you're using icons, you have to be careful with that. So that brings us to our next technique. You would maybe also want to use text. So text is even better than icons at conveying specific meanings, right? Maybe it's not as efficient as far as the space that it takes up, but it's very efficient as far as how explicit and clear it is about the meaning of what the issue is. So I would recommend that, yeah, you definitely use some text to reinforce whatever it is that the color is telling the user. So the caveat for text, though, is that, yeah, maybe it takes up a little extra space, and text might not actually really stand out on its own because our interfaces just have so much text in them. There's text everywhere. And for a screen reader user, especially, all that text kind of looks and sounds very similar. So the caveat there is that maybe the text on its own might not be enough to make something stand out to the degree that you would have wanted that color to stand out. So the best practice, I would say, is that solutions that combine both of these, right? So you would use both text and icons to reinforce the color. The text is going to help reinforce the meaning of the icon, which might be ambiguous. And then the icon is going to help the text stand out, because the text might not stand out enough as much as, or at least as much as the color. So between the color, text, and icon, you can be absolutely certain that your user is going to understand what's going on. We're going to see a example of that in a second. So for engineers, I think the responsibility here is to just double check that if in the design you are choosing to use an icon to fix this issue, that you're really mindful about having appropriate alt text to describe to the user the same information that that icon has. So in the case that you're using just the icon but no text, you're going to want to absolutely convey the meaning of that icon with alt text, right? So if you have an error field and you're highlighting it in red and then putting a little error icon next to it, and that's all you're doing, that error icon needs to have alt text that says this is an error. Similarly, if this is a use case where you're actually doing this on a form field, you're going to want to also put the invalid attribute on that same form field. That way, screen reader users are going to get the same information that visual users are getting from that color. The flip side of this is if you're using the recommended technique of having both text and an icon there to reinforce the color, then in that case, you're going to want to make sure that your icon has a null alt, which is going to ensure for screen reader users that they don't have redundant reading. So it doesn't say error, error, right? Because you have an error icon and next to it, you have an error text telling the user that there's an error. So the recommendation is if you're using an icon alone, make sure you have an alt. If you're using icon and text, you probably don't need the alt. You need to actually make sure that you have a no alt that will make the text not read. So an example of how that might look is here we have on the screen another example from our design system. We have a text field that is a phone number field, right? And we've gone in here and added some letters in that phone number. It says 1-800-555-A11Y. And then we have following that an error icon and then an error message that says numbers only, please. So as you can see here, we used color to reinforce that there's a problem on the screen, but then we also used icons and text so that everybody can understand what this means. So if I pull up, I use a tool called SimDaltonism. And this is how you write it. So this tool allows you to simulate different kinds of color vision. So I just have it set to monochrome right now just to drive point the home that if your user is colorblind and you're using red alone to convey a problem, you can imagine that this would really not stand out enough. But with the addition of the icon and the error message, it makes it very clear that there's one field here that's standing out from the others, and that's the one that needs your attention. So this is something I would recommend too, every now and then, that you spot check your designs with a tool like this. This is for designers and for implementation. This tool is called SimDaltonism. I can make this. So SimDaltonism. So that's what it looks like. So I would recommend that. All right, that brings us to our next improvement, and that is number 4, better form labels. Tell us a little bit about form labels.
Sure. As I'm sure everyone here is already aware, form labels are simply the label information in front of edit fields that make it possible to know which field you entered your first name, which your last name, which your address, and which your cat's favorite snack is. So in the case of edit labels, there's a couple of issues that we're going to discuss. First is that it helps to have them visually on the screen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And second, that when they are set up properly, it's possible for a screen reader user to hear the edit field label as they're moving through the fields. When it works properly, it sounds something like edit field name, edit address, edit cat's favorite snack. When it doesn't work, it sounds more like tab, edit, blank. Okay, escape, shift tab, or not shift tab, arrow back, name. All right, tab in, enter the name, tab, edit, blank, fine. And about this point, you start hearing swearing and other things that are not appropriate, not from the screen reader so much, but you get it.
So this is a really important one. So there's actually two whole success criteria that talk a little bit about this. One is 131, info and relationships. Just make sure that if you look into this one, you look specifically for the sections related to input fields, because info and relationships is actually a really big success criteria that includes a lot of stuff. So yeah, you gotta make sure you use your browser's find function in there to see the stuff about input fields, because there's a lot more else. Similarly, labels or instructions talks a lot about field labels as well, and also does cover quite a bit of ground. So be careful when you wade into there. You might realize that you're reading a lot more than you thought you were going to at first. So make sure to use your browser's find function. You want to tell us a little bit about who benefits from those good labels?
Sure. As mentioned, the screen reader user is going to benefit when the label is associated properly with the form field. Because, you know, we screen reader users, we talk to you all a lot. So there's reasons for that. Many of these issues will affect us pretty heavily. That said, when you don't have a persistent visual label on a field, you're going to make a lot of users pretty unhappy. Because if you tab into the field and the label disappears because it was really just a placeholder, now that user may be questioning what was supposed to go in there, especially if they're being attacked by small children or animals, or a lack of coffee, or too much time at the conference without enough sleep.
So yeah, this is going to be something that designers can address and improve. I think first and foremost by writing really clear, unique labels. So before you really design layouts or anything, and you're just deciding the content and what goes on the screens, you can make a lot of people's lives better by just writing better labels. So just having the actual text of them make sense and be unique. You know, don't have multiple fields on the same screen that have the same label. And like Amy mentioned, the other thing you're going to want to do is design persistent labels. Placeholders, if for a design perspective, if you take nothing away from number 4 here, besides all of the other stuff, is that placeholders are not labels. They're absolutely not meant to be labels, and they don't function well as labels. Like we mentioned, as soon as somebody starts typing in there, maybe they get distracted, they come back to what they were doing, they have no idea what field they were filling out anymore. So do not use placeholders as labels. Oh, sure. Oh, sorry, we need the microphone, if you just a second.
To having the labels named the same. So if you had like different sections, like parents information,
Sure.
child's information, then first name, last name, first name, last name.
Yes.
That's fine, or should maybe parents' first name, parents' last name?
Yeah.
Just child.
That's a really good question. The most accessible and least error-prone way to do it is, yes, to just have it directly right there in the label. This is also a use case a little bit for legends and what's it called? Yes, field set and legend, which is another technique. But I would recommend, yeah, just if you can at all, start off with just designing it to have very explicitly different labels, first and foremost. But yeah, there's other techniques you can use. I mean, you can also do arguably ARIA a little bit to set those apart. But I would recommend just having unique labels. It just makes things easier for the user overall. Great question. So yeah, when it comes to designing, for these labels, yeah, make them persistent. Don't use a placeholder. And if you're using horizontal controls, like say a text input field or a selection menu, the ideal place to put that label is going to be right above the field. Yes, you can put it next to the field, sure, but that could end up creating users problems for users that have screen magnification or browser zoom, especially if you don't have good responsive behavior. So that's our recommendation is the best practice is definitely to always, with those horizontal controls, to have the label right above it. That's going to be the best for the largest number of users. And when it comes to radio buttons and checkboxes, the best practice is to, of course, have them immediately following it. So just to the right of the control, this allows the user to very clearly associate that that is the label for that control. And also importantly, when they tab into it, that this is an interactive thing and not just some text. So I would recommend, yeah, for sure, those layouts are most accessible. There's side-by-side form layouts. You can do those, but I would say that they're not as accessible because they're not going to support screen magnification users as well. And if you do that, you're also going to have to complicate your CSS because for the responsive version of that code, when you have a narrower viewport or a zoomed in, or you're using it on a phone, you're going to have to code that top to bottom layout anyway. So you're just making more work for yourself if you use a side-by-side layout. So I would definitely recommend for those reasons that the top to bottom layout is ideal. The other scenario is, like we had an audience member mention here, is if you have groups of controls, like say if you have parents' information versus child's information, you're going to want to have the labels for those sections be above whatever form labels have below. So for engineers, this is actually going to be one of the heavier lift segments. The number one thing you're going to want to do, if at all possible, is use real HTML label elements. So HTML has a thing, natively that does exactly what we need it to, and it's called label, funny enough. So you're going to use a label element, and you're going to associate that label with the control that it's labeling using the for attribute. So that's going to point to the ID of that control. If for whatever reason you're in a development environment where you're allowed to change attributes, but you're not allowed to change what elements are being used to build everything, you should fight back and make sure that you can change it first and foremost. But if that's not at all possible, then you will have to resort to using ARIA labeled by, which is pretty much the same exact technique, but reverse. You put this attribute on the control, and it's going to point to its label, which unfortunately is not a real label. And so we have to, the computer is not intelligent yet. So it's not going to know just from the visual layout that, this field is attached to this unless it's really in there in the code. So you got to make sure it's in there. So the next part we're going to talk about is field set and legend. So this is when you have, like we mentioned, like some of those controls like that, or if you have groups of radio buttons. The number one use case, I think, for this is groups of radio buttons and checkboxes. Any other use case for field set and legend, I think, is going to be kind of secondary, and you should really tread carefully. Because what this is going to do is it's going to make the screen reader, especially VoiceOver on the Macs, announce what section of the form that you're in for each form element. So for example, I'm going to illustrate this a little bit. I'm not going to turn on the screen reader, but I want you to just get a sense of what I mean. If you have, a group of radio buttons, here on the screen, we have a legend above 3 different radio buttons. So the legend says, are you having a good time? And then the radio buttons say yes, no, or undecided. Each time a screen reader user changes their options, or if they shift tab backwards into this field, even though they wouldn't have otherwise seen that label, it's going to read it to them. So this makes sure that that important information about this grouping of controls is always going to be announced to the screen reader user. Now, the problem is if you start using this pattern for groupings where it's not as critical to know that, or if it's just larger sections of a form. Like if you have, for example, like a shipping area and a personal info area and then a billing area of your form, those big sections that contain a lot of fields are not a great candidate for using field set in Legend, because every time you tab into a new field, it's going to keep reminding the user what section they're in. So this is a use case that we would recommend is best served by using just headings. We're going to talk a little bit more about headings in a little bit, but the important thing to know is that if you have radios and checkboxes, use field set in Legend. If you have more than that, consider using something different, like a heading. So that's the best practice. So that's what this looks like. I mentioned headings. Luckily enough, that's our next section.
Fantastic.
So improvement number 5 is called better headings. Oh, we have a question? Yes.
There's, for requiring them to use no more than 200 characters.
Sure.
Where should that be?
Okay, so yeah, good question. If you have additional instructions for a field, you have 2 options. Number 1 is just putting it in the label itself. So, you have a question, and then you have the additional instructions just right there on the label, and it all just gets read together. That can make for a verbose label, but it also ensures that there's no chance anyone's missing it. So, same thing, you might see this sometimes on websites that are asking you to, like, say, if you're trying to get a flight and you have to input a date, it might say, start, or, the start date or end date or something like that. And it might have the formatting right there in the label, like start date, DDYY, YYY. So that's one way. That's the way that's the most robust and that absolutely no one will miss. The second one is to have that information just as some other bit of text on that form. And I would recommend that you put that somewhere that's very close to the control itself, both visually and in the code. I would say immediately adjacent to the field. And then if you do use that technique where it's not in the label, then you would have to use, make sure to let your engineers know that you want to use ARIA described by, which is basically going to tell the screen readers that when the user focuses on a field, it's going to basically, if they pause, they're going to hear that additional information that might be relevant there. But if it's really critical, ARIA described by doesn't always work reliably in all screen readers in all scenarios. I would just say you can just for the screen readers, tweak the ARIA of the label itself to read that additional information as if it were there in the label, but then you don't have to visually put it there for everyone as well.
Argue that it makes sense in that scenario to look at the length of your question and your described by text. If it's very long and very verbose, you do want to probably take your chances with the described by, just to keep the cognitive load manageable for the screen reader user.
Yes.
So one of those fun areas where a little more challenging.
The important thing, though, is you don't want to have it somewhere where the user is for sure going to miss it, like somewhere totally different on that page or on some separate like help section. You want to make sure that any instructions for individual fields are as close to the field as possible. So you want to give the user the best chance of discovering that stuff. Okay, so that is form labels. Oh, I think I already showed a little bit of what those form labels look like in the radio button case, so I think we're probably good here. So let's move on to headings, unless there's any other questions about forms, fields. Okay, we're good. So tell us a little bit about headings. What are headings?
Headings are bones or structure. They're your organizational outline. If you think about them like the information in a book and its table of contents, headings are much like that book in that ideally you have one heading level 1 in the page, just like you have one title for the book. Underneath of that, organizationally, you would have any heading level 2s, which are going to be major sections. In your book, once again, it's going to be major sections. Chapters might be heading level 3s. But it's the organizational structure upon which you build the rest of your site. And they are yet again one of our friends from WCAG 131 Info and Relationships. Also fall under, is it 247?
246 headings and labels as well. Oh, I'm amazed you can even get that close without having a reference because I don't remember the numbers. So tell us a little bit about who's going to benefit from this the most.
This one is going to help lots of folks, but honestly, headings, as a screen reader user, I want to get down on my knees and beg you, please look at your heading structure. It is one of the biggest benefits for screen reader users to have good, solid heading structure. All of us use it. I can't say all, I suppose, but everyone that I've ever worked with has used and focused on heading structure as how they kind of first come to understand the page or move quickly through it. Because our screen reader will let us jump from heading to heading, just like you turn to page 72 in your book to get to chapter 4. It's that easy, it's that quick. It makes that much of a difference for us. But it also is going to make a difference for your visual users. Cognitive disabilities often are benefited by having things broken up a little bit. And the headings allow you to have broken up areas that allow for skimming of the page. And if you think about, say, a social media website or a travel website or a site like Amazon that sells products, most individual items are at some level of heading structure to kind of help draw the eye to each individual post or item. And that's usually going to be involve headings as well if it's been coded well. And that means that I, as a screen reader user, can jump from Tide Pods to EcoPods to Europe Pods. This fell apart on me real fast. But it means that you're able to browse through and see the same options very quickly visually and choose the one you want because they all look the same.
Yep.
So
And-
how do you do your headings?
So for designers, what you're going to want to make sure you do, and I know it sounds silly and obvious, but it needs to be said, make sure your headings obviously look like headings. Just like a screen reader user is going to depend on that, and they certainly do. Visual users skim pages, right? Like you land on Amazon, anything that has a lot of data, you're not just going to read everything line by line. You're going to scroll around until you see, you know, if you're in the right section. If you want to see the reviews, you're going to go down to where you see all the little stars, and there's a thing at the top that says reviews and ratings. So everyone stands to benefit from good headings, but especially screen reader users. Anecdotally, I can say that I have never done a usability test with a screen reader user where when we ask them what helps them the most, they don't mention headings. And when we ask them what hampers them the most, that they also mention headings, right? So headings are going to be like do or die for making sure that your stuff makes sense to a screen reader user, but it helps everyone. Oh, we got another question. Make sure we have the.
It's more of a comment. I want
Sure.
to say, so, you know, my association, I work for American Psychological Association, you know, over the past 5 to 7 years, we really started making a big push for accessibility. And that was one of the major things that kind of drove us to it.
Great.
You know, we, of course, we used the headings. Years ago, it was more just visual.
Yeah.
We were doing a lot of visual. So a lot of times we would go from H2 to H5 just because visually it looked good, you know what I mean?
Right.
And we started making a big push. And so what happened with some of the programmers, they actually added pseudo headings as well.
Mhm.
So now visually, if we wanted to still make it, you know, appear as an H2 or H5
Sure.
under H2, it can look that way, but the pseudo would be the H3 or
The other way around. Yeah.
So it reads for the screen reader, it'll still read H1, H2, H3, although visually it may have, you know, whatever look we wanted to look like, but that was very important. So, you know, we've made concerted effort to go back to old pages and just
Yeah.
update those, so.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's definitely a best practice for implementation. You want to decouple your visual styles from your heading levels because there's a lot of scenarios where your design might need to have your same level headings looking a little different. We're actually going to look at an example of that in a minute. So yeah, you all did the right thing there because it's more crucial for us to have a consistent and hierarchical and sensible content structure for the screen reader users than it is for us to be really absolute about every H2 looks exactly like this. That's not really going to help a lot of people. That's not really that meaningful. But having that hierarchy in order definitely will.
That was a great example, really, of exactly the kind of thing that makes such a difference to a disabled user. I can't speak enough about how much good heading structure makes me willing to give a page the benefit of the doubt, even when other things are maybe a little shakier. So that
Yep.
was well done on your part.
So moving along to engineers, definitely you want to use real heading elements and you don't want to just use CSS. That's on the other side of it. That's when you're doing it really bad, is not even bad heading structures and things that are out of order, but not using headings, right? You just use CSS to make the font bold and to make the text big. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure you really use those heading elements in the right order. So I would recommend on the engineering side, while you're working on anything, to double check it. I recommend this bookmarklet called H123. We have a link to it in the presentation, and I can demo it really quick just so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to show you here the New Yorker page. So actually, here's a really good example of sometimes things that are the same heading level, not having the same exact style, right? Like here we have all of the articles on this page are the same heading level, but you know, depending on whether it's like the most important article that they're trying to highlight or, you know, a big one inside of a section versus some of these smaller lists of them. In the hierarchy, they're all the same, right? Like we have a today's mix heading and then several articles in that, including one article that's really big that they want to bring the most attention to. But logically speaking, they're all at the same level. Like these are all single articles inside of the today's mix section. So this is where we're seeing exactly what we were just talking about. We have H3s that look like this, where they're a little bit smaller, so you can pack a list of them next to each other. And then you have H3s that look like this because they're a big article that they want to bring a lot of attention to because it's featured for some reason. So you're going to see that that's okay. That's not a big problem as long as your structure is good. So I want to load up this H123 bookmarklet. When you come to their installation page, it just looks like this. And you can grab any of these recommended little buttons that they have here and you're just going to drag that to your toolbar up there and let go, and bam, you have a new tool in your tool belt that makes it really easy to check heading levels. So if we go here to this New Yorker page and we hit H123, now I recommend just checking off all the little options because I think they're useful. So what you're going to see is a visual outline of how your heading structure looks, and this makes it easier to tell when there's problems. So for example, we can see that the New Yorker page, obviously there's only one heading level 1, thankfully. But this tool points out to us by having it struck out that they're using a weird technique for their H1 where it's making it not visible to screen reader users. So that's not good. They're doing a lot of things right, but they're doing this one thing wrong. So if, you know, maybe this element at the top, it was like a graphic or something, and they didn't want to make it the H1. So they put in an H1 as text and they hid it. But this plugin is letting us know that they hid that H1 that they put in there for semantics in a way that makes it not accessible to screen readers. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot a little bit here. Another thing that we can see is that they skipped directly from their heading level 1 to a heading level 3. So you're going to see that, you know, if they're doing things right, this should be pretty much like a bulleted list outline of the page, and you should only go one level deeper each time. So like you can see here, you know, that's the case for all of these sections. Like if we go to, if we highlight today's mix, just like we saw earlier, you know, you're going to see that that's a heading level 2, and then all of the articles inside of there. And each time you hover over this, it's going to highlight those. Then those are going to be heading level 3s, and that's good. But unfortunately for that highlighted article at the very top of the page, they skipped right into heading level 3. So the user, you know, there is something to be said about consistency, right? This makes it so that all the articles on the page are heading level 3s. So the user can scan for all the articles in a consistent way. But the way to fix this problem would have been to just insert a heading level 2 to give the user a little bit more context. Why is this article up here, and why does it look so different from everything else? Maybe what this calls for is having a heading level 2 that says featured article. It could be as simple as that. And that would immediately fix this problem. I would mention that this tool also highlights those issues by making them red. You can also tell that it's wrong because, you know, the indentation of this is like skipping a whole level. So it's showing you that information that this is wrong in 2 different ways, both in color and in position. So it's a really easy way to just go on a website or an app. You just click one button and all of a sudden you see this outline, and you can tell a lot from just looking at that outline about whether it was done right or wrong. So highly recommend using this. So that's headings. That brings us to our next improvement. This is number 6, avoid auto-playing media. Amy, what is auto-playing media?
Honestly, though, autoplaying media is going to be any animation, any video, any audio.
Congratulations. I'm interrupting all the important work that you're doing on here to let you know that you won a big prize.
My mute button. Mute. I'm about to mutiny.
But yeah.
Apparently But seriously, having something interrupt you like that can be very disconcerting. It's enough to knock you off your game and make bad puns. And it makes it so that there's a lot of people who find that these are really a problem. Honestly, I think that probably everyone in this room could agree that auto-playing media is a challenge for them in one way or another.
For sure. And this one is so disruptive that there's 3 separate success criteria that all try to prevent different shades of this issue. So that's 142 audio control, 222 pause, stop, hide, and 231 3 flashes or below. So these are all criteria that talk about having these really dynamic or time-based media on your page not disrupt what the user is trying to do in different ways. So who would this benefit the most?
It's going to be most impactful for anyone for whom there might be motion sickness or even seizures from animations. So we're talking, it could be life and death, it could be illness, but those are the most extreme cases. If you step down a level, it's going to help screen reader users who aren't frantically trying to figure out how to shut up this audio that's talking over their screen reader voice so they can't access anything. And it's going to help everybody who ever accidentally opened a browser window in a meeting. Congratulations, you've won. Or is working on a project and goes to open a training video that they're intending to listen to silently with a sleeping baby on their lap. Or everyone. Cognitive disabilities are often, for me as someone with ADHD and just enough vision to get me into trouble, the constant scrolling of carousels are like this hypnotic, I don't know what's going on anymore because I'm continuing to watch the carousel around and around and around. And it's going to be the same with so many of the animations. And like I said, the audio interrupting everything everyone is doing all the time. And honestly, it's not even good for the people who want whatever the animation or interactive element is, because they may not be ready for it yet.
Yeah.
If it's a podcast, yeah, I want to listen to this podcast, but let me press play when I've got my popcorn and my cat.
But yeah, we really can't underscore enough the importance of this stuff, because this is one of those things where your design can physically harm someone. If you design something that has flashing content in it, as the video game industry is finding out now, like if you don't warn your users and if you don't give them a way to stop it, you can trigger a seizure in someone and cause them physical harm. Like they might fall on their desk and they might hit their head. Like they could potentially die from this stuff. So I would take this really seriously, like just not take it for granted that you can hijack the user's attention, because that goes counter to whatever it is that your website or application is trying to do in the first place. You're trying to get the user information or give them power to do something, and doing this kind of stuff gets in the way more often than not. So unfortunately for this one, though, this isn't one of those cases where I can recommend really specific techniques for designers or for engineers, because honestly, the best thing we can really say about this is don't do it, right? There's some shades of gray here. For example, if you have sound or videos that are really important to your experience, just give the user control. Like Amy mentioned, like let them decide when it's going to start playing. There's nothing wrong with having that stuff on there, but there is something wrong about taking that control away from the user, because you could really harm them. When it comes to motion, like animations, things that are looping on the screen, you have to keep it under 5 seconds. You can't just, for example, have a carousel that infinitely always rotates without the user being able to pause it, because that's going to trap them in that loop. So if it's longer than 5 seconds, you have to give the user a way to pause it. But really, I would recommend the best practice is just keep it under 5 seconds. If you have something that's moving, if you have motion at all, animations, just make sure all that stuff is short and sweet, so you're not hijacking the user's attention and harming your own goals with whatever the website is. So that's the recommendations for auto playing media. So the last one that we're going to talk about is making sure that your interface is in the right language. This one is one that's easy to miss, but can have disastrous impacts for screen reader users. Tell us a little bit about that, Amy. What is the language attribute?
Attribute is an HTML tag that literally tells the computer what language, I should say human readable language in this case, not computer code language, your website is coded in. It literally lets the computer know, hey, this was written for in Spanish. And so if someone's going to be using it with text to speech, it should be read in Spanish. It's one of the most awesome ones here today, because talk about an easy win. It's going to immediately impact your users. If you've got the wrong language attribute and you fix it, you've just made a whole lot of users happy.
Yeah, this is something where with, I think, okay, with 8 characters in your HTML, you can make the difference between a useless website that does nothing for somebody and a very useful website that gives them a bunch of information and lets them complete tasks. So this one is on the effort involved versus the amount of impact it has is one of the best ones. So tell us a little bit about who specifically stands to benefit from that.
Once again, it's going to be screen reader users first and foremost, but really we can widen this out to beyond just screen reader users to anyone using a text-to-speech application. That could be the read aloud in your Edge browser, or it could be a different text-to-speech application that interfaces with your site. This one, I will admit, is just conjecture on my part, but I will bet that the language attribute is useful when somebody like Google Home or Lady A or Siri are giving quick overviews from websites because it will know what language to speak the text out in. And it will not try to read your German language website with a thick Spanish accent.
Yeah, and I could definitely vouch for this. Being that I'm a English and Portuguese speaker. For example, I have my phone set to Brazilian Portuguese for like all of the general stuff, the settings, and for Siri, for example, voice commands, everything. But you know, I live in the US and I do a lot here. So one problem that is an example of this is that, you know, the app that I use for directions, you know, Apple Maps or even Google Maps sometimes, actually, yeah, definitely Apple Maps for sure. It's trying to use my system's language for making those announcements, but it's not taking into consideration the language of the street signs and things of that nature. So what I end up getting is in Florida, we have State Road 7, which is a very important road in Florida that goes up and down the state. So it's really hard to drive around Florida without making, you know, a turn on State Road 7. So when my phone is reading me directions, because it's not aware of those language differences, because Apple hasn't encoded the street signs languages into that data, when I'm making a turn on State Road 7, you know, which is in the mapping app spelled SR7, which in the English translation, they read as State Road 7. But because I have my phone set to Portuguese, it's telling me Senhor Sete, which is like Mr. 7, which is really different from State Road 7. So make a right on Mr. 7 is not like, who's Mr. 7 and why is he here and why do I need to worry about him right now? I'm trying to focus on not hitting the car in front of me. So these are the kinds of issues that you cause when you don't have, you know, language data encoded directly in your interface. So that's definitely something you want to avoid. So with this one, designers are off the hook. There's nothing designers can really do about this one. Maybe, you know, at the design phase, capturing what language something is in, or if there's any deviations from it. But really, this one falls on the developers. But thankfully, it's very, very easy. So if you're an engineer, how you're going to improve this is to just put the language in the code. Two places you're going to want to focus. One is the most important, and that's at the very top of your HTML. These are the 8 characters I said that you just put in your website, and all of a sudden it's a world of difference for a screen reader user like Amy. You know, that's the difference between I can go on this website and make a purchase versus I have no idea what's going on. I'm closing this tab right now, right? So that's just 8 characters. Come on, 8 characters, y'all. Put it in there. So that way you do that is right at the beginning of your HTML is you're going to have at the very beginning of that tag, it's going to be just HTML and then lang equals, and then a language code. Something you might want to do is anytime you have a page or a screen with mixed language content, for example, maybe, you know, there's a Wikipedia article that's talking about something that's from another country or, you know, a concept that doesn't exist in another language, right? Then you would want to use the more contextual in place language attribute, which works exactly the same, but you can scope it to any individual element on the page. So for example, if you have a mixed language sentence in English, like sometimes people say in English is English, given the history of the language and the colonial nature of the countries that speak it, there's a lot of borrowing from other cultures or stealing. So for example, in English, you might see somebody talk about joie de vivre, which is like a French concept, like where someone has like a spark for life or a general joy in their step. So you would say in English, that person possesses a joie de vivre. But, you know, if you don't put the language attribute in that little bit of French, then the screen reader is going to say, you know, something like that person possesses a joie de vivre, you know, and it's like, oh, like, what is even that? Like even somebody who knows that phrase and maybe doesn't know how to spell it won't know what the screen reader is saying. So it's very important anytime you have content that is mixed, that you specify that for that little bit that it's in a different language. Something else you can do for this is you can be even more specific. So you can specify not just the language, but a region. So, for English, there's American English, there's UK English, there's Indian English, Australian English. There's all kinds of different shades of English. And you want to be consistent with whatever it is that your messaging or branding is trying to convey. You wouldn't want, for example, the BBC website to be encoded as US English, because they use different spellings for things in the UK. They use different idioms, they use different expressions. And it might not make a lot of sense to have an American English voice reading those things. But it's not super destructive. It's this, when you get into this, then it's like really a lot easier for the user to understand what's going on. But this is like what you do for bonus credit, like for extra credit. If you don't do this, you won't ruin someone's day, but you might make their experience that much better if you do it. And it's, again, just an extra 3 characters, so why not throw it in there? Oh, we have a question about language encoding. Can we have the microphone, please?
So, local county government, so we have a lot of election information out there.
Oh, yeah.
Instructor, because she wants it to be a sentence in English and then the next sentence following
Sure.
in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
How would that be coded?
Oh, yeah. So that would be a perfect example of the second technique that we have here on the screen. You would have, for each of those sentences, you would just put right in front of it what language that sentence is in. And so as long as it's contained by one HTML element, then it's just going to read that in that language.
Okay, so if it's, we didn't know how to test
Mhm.
to show that it was reading, it wouldn't read double depending on what the.
Oh, but in that case, it will. It will. And honestly, it probably should, because a screen reader user is going to want to know that there's the same sentence in 3 languages on there, just like a visual user knows, right? Like, for example, if I am going to that website and I want to read that information in English, but maybe my mom needs to read it in Portuguese, it's materially meaningful for me to know that that page has English and Portuguese on it. So you wouldn't want the screen reader to hide content from someone just based on our guess of what they want to read. If it's on the page as text, they should have access to it. Great question. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the recommendations. So if you do these 7 things, it makes a really big impact. So we're just going to wrap up the list now and just go over a brief recap. So Amy, tell us, why should we prioritize?
We all are so busy. There are so many success criteria. And we may have so many errors on our sites and in our applications, but with prioritization, we can make meaningful differences early on that will really impact users and give our teams a boost and get us excited for the road ahead with the accessibility journey world.
Definitely. And so just to recap, the 7 things that we recommended were good focus indicators, having enough contrast, especially for text, reinforcing meaningful colors with icons and text, ideally with both, labeling your interactive controls correctly, both in the visual sense and in the code, making sure that your headings make sense, again, both visually and in code. Please not auto playing any media, any audio, any animations. When we were practicing our talk, actually, when I did the New Yorker example, there was a really distracting ad at the top with a bunch of motion, and it made my brain freeze for like 30 seconds while we were trying to just get through our presentation. I was like, what is this? Oh God, I gotta scroll this out of the screen. I can't deal with this right now. And that's just like, please don't do it.
And there was audio playing in the background of the room we were in. And somehow an audio advertisement started while I was starting to speak, and I had the same
Oh,
situation.
yes. So yeah, I mean, in every way imaginable, auto playing video, auto playing audio. Nobody wants that. And the last one, and certainly the one that has the best return on investment is make sure you specify your content language in the code. And with that, do we have any more questions? We got one question here. Can we get the mic?
We have a running joke I think about ESPN and just adding like a light number 8 here is make sure it's good navigation.
Yeah,
Available.
yeah,
Yes.
great.
Anytime you want to laugh, open up ESPN and try to tab to like a main article. You have all the scoreboards and all the.
Yeah.
Long time it takes 100 tabs before you can get to the main content because there's no skip, so. That's
Yeah.
been a running joke on my team, like, with that, I call skip or tab order, you send it to an engineer, or like, here, get to the main article, or give them an article on the page, so. That's just light number 8 that I think is not make a huge, but yes, but on for everything else.
No, that makes a pretty big improvement.
Excellent suggestion, yeah.
ESPN. Yeah. Yeah, and until they have like a federal league or something, I don't know when they get, but yeah, so it's been a running joke for years now.
Any more questions? All right, great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We have our emails here if you need to get in contact with us and want to chat, so feel free to reach out.